is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, chapters 24 and 25, and 23. In this episode, I finished what I started last week, and we find out exactly how Gia's basically framing operation is going. Spoilers, it's going well for her, but not anybody else. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning these episodes. Also, Kyle, I want to give you a shout out for always telling me exactly which chapters to read. It is very, very helpful. So this 23 is the one that I had been supposed to talk about last week, but I spent so much time on other topics in the first two chapters that I did not get to it. So it actually kind of works out that it was put onto this episode because it lines up with another kind of time jump here. So the first thing is a letter from Zomi to her mother. Now, this is interesting because all of these letters are from one person to another with vague references to what they have heard from the person they're writing to in their last letter. So Zomi is writing to her mother, telling her that she is a little bit concerned about the fact that her mother is going to go to visit relatives for a long time, and that she sort of sees this as a sign that her mother is not happy in the house that Zomi built for her. So this is a real bunch of information here. Zomi is clearly doing pretty well. In terms of finances. She is out here buying her mother a house. She has given her mother maids, and she says, "I suspect the neighbors are jealous of your daughter's success and have made you uncomfortable. Don't let them spoil your enjoyment." And that's one of those things where I'm like, on the one hand, maybe she is correct and that's all that there is to it. On the other hand, her daughter is working for the people who kind of killed everybody in their community, right? Her daughter is working for the government, and the government are the folks that have stripped this area of their fathers and sons and left them with nobody to help support households and families. So it could be simple jealousy, but it could also be seeing her daughter being part of the system now that exploits them, and seeing what she is getting from her daughter as the more evidence of the unfair advantage that somebody who works in government gets over ordinary people. This is just Zomi is trying to sort of boil it down to something very simple in a way that I think is intellectually dishonest, especially for Zomi, who normally can be rather good at seeing the nuance in situations and reading into, taking things to the second and third step. And I am curious if Zomi is going to visit her mother and get a better idea of what's actually going on here. I could be also totally wrong, and it's a whole other thing, But as far as I can imagine, I am somebody who is pretty anti-cop, anti-military in general. I have a hard time with the system that we have set up and the people that it is supposed to help, allegedly, versus whom it actually helps. And this would be me accepting a new home and all this stuff, with the friends that I have now who are also pretty anti-cop, from my father, who got a promotion at the FBI, right? It'd just be a weird thing where I'm taking gifts from a system that I don't agree with, and I'm like willing to accept the largesse of said system. But, you know, it's just, I don't know. I thought this was interesting. So Zomi says that work has been going really well. The queen, I think, trusts me more with each passing day. She talks about how she's teaching daughters of farming families the Zindari letters and reading Anno classics. And I like this, you know, all the education for women in this community is welcome. And she says that she has taken to preparing her reports to the queen and other ministers with fake classical Anno allusions translated from folk sayings you used to lecture me with. And she gives an example. Nothing good ever comes from bothering the gods when they don't wish to be bothered. Every day in the lives of the common man is a day of battle. And she says that not a single minister has recognized them from what they are. And they all basically are pretending that they know because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of the others. But that she thinks maybe Queen Gin does know. And I think Queen Gin, who, you know, has humble origins and lived on the street, is probably one of the only people in the position to recognize some of these sayings as things that commoners throw around. So that could be, you know, where it comes from. And she signs it, Your Mimi, which I thought was sweet, still, you know, calling herself that. So then we get a letter from Timu to his father. Guys, this is so... This entire thing is one sentence, okay? I'm going to read this to you. Most honored Renga, permit your unworthy son to wish you 1,000 happy days in the space of 100, which is to say, may each of your days be 10 times as happy as each regular day, which is not to say that there is such a thing as a regular day for the overburdened and wise emperor of the islands of Dara, since each of your days must be 10 times as worrisome as a day in the life of someone like me, therefore making the wish of a day 10 times as happy on balance merely appropriate and deserving. Ah, words trip over one another when this unworthy son tries to express his genuine affection and awe for his most august sovereign and father. Like, one sentence, guys. There's an ellipses for where you think the sentence ended, but it didn't quite. So he says, your last letter shocked and surprised me, and I devoted all my time to finding an answer. And your query was, confirm the candidates sent by Dasu to the grand examination this year are indeed from Dasu. And he continues on for, it says, 30 pages. And then we jump to Gia jabbing Kuni to wake him up because he fell asleep. And we have another scene of Rasana and Gia trying desperately to, like, behave with one another. I feel that Rasana is trying much harder than Gia because we know that Gia is actually orchestrating this huge plan that Rasana doesn't know about. Now, I would be very excited to find out that Rasana has her own plan that she's been working on that we haven't seen, but I do not get that vibe based on the small bits of point of view we get from Rasana, because we see inside her mind for a little bit and we don't see any evidence of that. So Kuni laments the fact that this letter was so long and really said so little. And then he has to get them to tell him what the summary was of the answer. And Gia says, he explained that, yes, your suspicion was right. Of all the candidates sent to the grand examination from Dasu, almost half were from families who had moved to Dasu from the core island within the last 5 years. And Kuni is just like, fuck, I knew it. So this is about the fact that the people who are from outside of the main system that was already getting, obviously, a lot of advantages because of their educational system and the, you know, funding there and the way that they are taught, they decided to add points to the what do you call it? The exam results of people from these areas to sort of try to balance out the lack of privilege that those areas receive. And what happened is that people who are wealthy and have the privilege of being able to move house and, uproot everything, they are moving to Dasu in order to get those extra points, even though they are from the areas that already have the privileged education. So basically, it's the usual story, it's somebody pretending to be a minority on their application somewhere. It's somebody just borrowing oppression is the way I sort of look at it, trying to behave as if you are from, because you don't understand the genuine obstacles to other people that these advantages were created for. So basically what Kuni has tried to do is create a sort of an affirmative action plan for this test grading. And these people are trying to take advantage of it, and misrepresent themselves and their origins. It's extremely predictable. He kind of saw that this was going to be what was happening. And Gia says, I suppose if the policy entices some Han families to move to Dasu, it will, in a way, also help elevate the spirit of scholarship there. And he says that he's going to tell Timu that those who have been there longer will get more points. And Gia's like, how about you let him figure this out? Because the point of us sending them to each of these places to govern was for them to learn how to cope with these issues themselves. You're not supposed to be solving problems for him. You're supposed to be letting him figure out how to solve these things. And he agrees to that. Now, I really don't know, because what Gia says is true. That's the point of sending them. But I can't help but wonder if Gia is wanting to make Kuni look like he is not taking action in order to sow more dissent. Because Timu isn't super, I don't even want to say he isn't smart. That's not it. He isn't imaginative. And he doesn't seem to have a lot of, what's the word for when you take it upon yourself to do something? But he doesn't have that. It seems like he's much more comfortable with asking permission and being told by an authority figure, yeah, that's a good idea, do that. But he doesn't seem to have the faith in himself, or he feels like maybe it's not his place to simply decide on a course of action and do it himself, So while Gia's advice seems totally sound, I don't trust, obviously, the intent behind it. Kyle Summer says initiative. Yes, that's the one. Thank you, Kyle. He doesn't have initiative, I don't think. So then we get one from Firo. I should mention, too, that Timu's name is so close to timid, and Firo's name is so close to fire, which each of those very much encapsulates what these young men are like. I am not sure what Thera's name is like, but maybe we'll get there. So Firo says, between the time of my last letter to you and now, there's been a sudden spate of assassinations of officials and posters denouncing the House of Dandelion tacked to Magistracy gates. Garrison soldiers have grown fearful and would not leave camp unless in 2s and 3s. This was most surprising, as I thought the threat from the secret cults was on the verge of being eliminated. So we get a pretty grim picture from Firo of how things are going. It's doing pretty much what I had said, which is you throw a match out there and the fire starts and you don't really get to decide what direction it goes into. Now, Gia is doing a lot to direct it behind the scenes, using all of these secret sources and fucking killing anybody who knows anything. Gia's being absolutely bloodthirsty, which we'll see later. But I still am not totally sure how much of this is part of her plan and how much of this is accidentally happening. So he is talking about the different cults, which is what they're calling these groups of people who worship the hegemon. And he says that he outlawed private worship of Matazindu, and direct all who wish to honor the hegemon to the mausoleum in Farum, which on balance doesn't seem like a good idea to me. Like saying like you're not allowed to worship whomever you want in the privacy of your home is, to me, something that's just of course going to spark pushback and make people very, I feel like, what's the word? It's going to make them have like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from there on, because you're getting into real personal choice shit. And I feel like that makes people contentious and sparks this sort of like, oh, you've taken it one step too far into our homes now in a way that it hadn't been before. And now, like, if I don't put my foot down, who knows how far you're going to go, you know? So he's talking about these different cults. Most of these cults were started by dissatisfied nobles of old Tiro states, though a few were funded by Gajira merchants unhappy with their new policy of supporting the farmers at the expense of merchants by setting a price floor. We have been coordinating with Queen Gin to reveal the identities of all the merchants involved. Meanwhile, we've also been mindful of your admonition to pair the whip with sweet apples. While we have executed the cult leaders publicly, ignorant men and women who supported the leaders out of a misguided devotion were treated with leniency. So, obviously, they were, like, Kuni recognized that he was being way too harsh on the outset. And instructed him to pull back a little bit because, you know, they can't just alienate everybody. Like it has to seem that that treason isn't going to be tolerated, but also we aren't going to be fascists and interpret everything that is done as treason. There has to be a balance there. So he's talking about how, like, they had used to, these cults would sort of have their headquarters out in the woods and stuff away from villages. And it was actually pretty easy to spot them if you were up in an airship, because their fires and stuff would be going up. And, like, you know, a fire from one person isn't going to catch your attention, but a bunch of fires from a group of people that's gathering is definitely going to be noticeable. So they decided that they had figured out how to track them down, but recently those fires started to disappear, and yet the cultists did not seem less active. So obviously they changed something about the way they were doing things. So what they decided to do was they put like a restriction on the import of fuels for lighting fires, and let people get a little bit worried about the restrictions and the fact that maybe they would run out. Then they lifted the restrictions, allowing the sales to continue freely, but they planted rumors that the restriction would be coming back shortly, so as to cause people who are worried about running out to make a larger purchase out of the gate to compensate. And they kept track of people who were buying much bigger, who were purchasing much bigger bundles of wax and barrels of oil than normal. And they tracked those down, and they found that 2 of the Tiro kings had been building a secret society in caves and cellars so that they were not trackable by the airships. And I'm wondering if these caves are the ones that we saw those men meeting in, if it's the same place. Because, you know, we saw the whole thing with the mirror happened in a cave. So he says, in the past, arresting and hanging cult leaders followed by priests, was usually sufficient, but this time the soldiers had to fight. Not only did the followers resist violently, they slaughtered the priests, claiming they were not the proper spokespersons for the hegemon. And there's a lot of people who were saying that they could actually talk to the spirit of the hegemon, and they find the whole thing with the mirrors. And that, you know, they don't know how they're made, but it's really clear that this isn't magic. It's just something that's really unusual and hasn't been figured out by anybody else. And after this letter is finished being read, Gia, with her fucking ways, is like, well, it's just a mirror. And Kuni isn't an idiot. He's like, it's just a mirror. These people are not educated. They're superstitious. They believe in gods. Like, that is plenty. These mirrors are just like the scroll that was found inside the fish that started the entire rebellion that made me fucking emperor. That is enough. That's been enough many times in the past. There is no reason to dismiss this as being unimportant. It ends with like the rebels' ranks are swelling. They seem to be finding weapons out of nowhere. We're suffering setbacks, but we're going to keep going. And there's really something about it that sounds like shit's getting pretty out of hand, and there's this, moment where Gia thinks to herself that Ringkota is probably regretting taking her advice. And I would love to see the two of them like pair up and see how she wiggles to get out of this time, because I wonder how much he understands that this was her plan. I don't know that Rin is ever aware he's been played, and I feel kind of bad for him, And Kuni says, this is one of the times I really wish for the Council of Luanzia. He picks up one of the mirrors that has been sent and sees the reflection of the hegemon, the face staring at him off of the wall, and is just kind of moved by it despite himself, which I thought was interesting. He's just sort of, as much as he knows that this is just some sort of like manufacturing trick, it's still, even on someone who knows that, has this sort of, he has this reaction to it. And I thought that was really telling. So he says, if anyone can survive the wrath of Tazu, it's a disciple of Lutho, the aged and wise turtle, because he's talking about how Luan has ridden out to try to get to like the end of the world, and we have not heard of him since. So yikes. I really hope that he's okay. Luan, what's going on, buddy? Okay, so chapter 24, an outing. Thera and Farah sat on the wharf, dangling their feet into the cold water. So the two of them are dressed as peasants, and they are out here just trying to have a nice day, hang out with each other, enjoy the heat and the sun, the water. And while they are hanging out, it turns out Thera has taken over the education of her little sister and also of herself. And they have been dipping their toes into all sorts of different subject matter and trying different, like, sometimes it's books, sometimes it's poems and paintings, sometimes it's logogram. Like, there's all different things that they have been absorbing, which I think is the best way to get an education, even though it can be difficult to know where to go next. And they had snuck out of the palace at this point. And Thera says, if we did this more often, I'm afraid my mother would tear all her hair out. When we get back, she'll probably make you write the 100-stroke logograms 100 times. And at this point, they are interrupted by this really beautiful woman who it becomes clear is a goddess. And it's kind of fun because this goddess is like pretending to be a person, and these princesses are pretending to be peasants. Everybody is pretending to be somebody else, which is, it's funny that the next time that we see Thera, she's behaving this way after taking such a, like, it seemed at least, taking it so personally when Zomi called her out for not being herself. But, habits die hard. So this woman, they think that they're trespassing and that she has come to tell them, like, hey, this is my property. What are you doing? But it turns out that she is just coming to sit with them. And she says that they are experiencing one of 4 great pleasures in life. And Farah asks, what are the 4 great pleasures? And she says that would be sitting by a cozy fire in winter while snow falls outside the window, climbing into a high place after a spring rain to admire a revitalized world, eating crabs with freshly brewed tea next to the fall tides, and dipping your feet into a cool, lotus-covered lake in the middle of summer. And Farah is like disappointed by that, but I loved it because this is exactly my fucking jam. Like, I am super duper into seasonal living, and there is just something about each season that is so distinctly its own feel and so like impossible to capture in other seasons that you just can't like it is just kind of burned into your mind from childhood, and once you experience it again as an adult, you feel for a split second like you're that kid again. Like the smell of asphalt when it's hot and then it begins to rain. That's the smell of playing outside over the summer with your friends. That's that smell. Or like the smell of being outside in the heat and somebody brings out the hose or a sprinkler, that kind of thing. You know, that is that feeling. The scent of wood smoke outside when it's cold and you go in and there's a fire. Like, there is just, this is exactly correct. And this little girl doesn't understand yet that those things are what will remain no matter what you've got for money, no matter where you are in your life, no matter how old you get, those things will remain as beautiful and unique every time as they were when you were a kid. So yeah, I loved that. So she says, it's better to have one true friend who can understand the voice in your heart when you pluck out a hesitant tune on the zither than to have the unthinking adoration of millions. And Thera is like not really sure that she agrees with that, but she thinks that, well, this lady's interesting, so that's something. I agree with it personally. The older I get, as much as I love having people admire me, you know, of course, anybody does. And with doing the show, having more and more people who are fans of the show writing in, and my audience expanding is very exciting. And for just the simple fact of like my income, I always appreciate it. But the compliments that come from a lot of people that you don't know and who don't necessarily know you are never going to mean as much as the compliments from somebody that you know well and who knows you for real, like really knows who you are. And I think that's like just something that a lot of us either we don't learn it until later in life, past when we will take strangers' opinions and other, you know, peers' opinions too seriously when we really shouldn't care. It turns out to not have been worth it to care. Or we get hooked on validation from strangers. And especially the way that social media works, I think that's a much bigger danger these days than it ever was, because you have access to more people and people have more access to you. So it's easy to get hooked on the dopamine hit of comments from people that are just giving you positive feedback and forget that in the end, those people are not close to you. They don't know you really. And while it's nice for them to say a nice thing to you, and you can accept that and be happy about it, it's not going to nourish you the way that a real connection does. Those comments will be whipped cream. But if you want a meal, that's going to have to come from somewhere else. Farah says something about the love of a handsome man. I think that's the most important thing. And Thera says it's all the stories the ladies, or the older girls, tell her, and all the plays put on by traveling puppet troupes. Lady Mira killing herself for love. Princess Kikomi killing for love. Lady Zai jumping into the Liru for love. So this woman sits down and is looking at Thera after the way that she said that, and it's just kind of like, yeah, I hear in your voice that this doesn't really ring true for you. And Thera's like, well, songs about men are all about their adventures and their friendships and their skill. But always the songs about women are about finding a lover, about their beauty. And the lady says, you sound like another young woman I once knew. She was not much older than you when we met, and she also had much to say about the fate of women and the price of beauty. So I'm thinking she's talking about Kikomi, but I do not remember. And And then says, but I think you might be judging this song too harshly. And they are listening to the lyrics because the song started off with a woman talking about how some man should choose her and have children with her. But then the next lines are, but perhaps no hand will ever pick me, and that is not so terrible a fate. I'll kiss the water and release my seeds to see them wander the watery ways. How far will they go? What will they behold? What distant shores will they touch and visit before they sink and sprout and grow and bloom to sway over sun-dapple waves anew? So on the one hand, I see what she's getting at with this song, but it's still like there's an initial impression that I still think Thera is right. So Thera has this moment of like talking about the dandelion seeds and how they can ride the wind, and lotuses ride in the water. Flowers get to do more than some people. And she has a bit of a moment of like self-pity. And I was kind of like, Thera, you really need to snap out of it. Like, I really like you and I know you're smart, but you're getting hung up on this like identity of being a victim here, and you need to figure it out because nobody's going to feel sorry for you, girl. Like, you got to just move past this. So the lady buys some lotus pods from a woman and gives her way more money than they are actually worth and tells her to keep the change. And the moment there is like, we get to find out that the people out here are very worshipful of Tututika, the goddess of fresh water and agriculture. And Thera starts to put it together that that's who this is. And she's like pretty in awe of it, but she still handles herself, which I liked. So the woman, the goddess, cuts open one of the pods to take the seeds out. Now, guys, I made a mistake yesterday. I'm reading this and I'm like, that's really interesting. I wonder what lotus pods look like. And what do the seeds look like? Because later, I'm picturing them as like a pomegranate seed. But then later she talks about them being stuffed with things. And I was like, well, there's no way that's a pomegranate seed then. Because that's way too small to stuff with anything. So I Googled it. And Google autofilled when I started to search for lotus pod. It autofilled it with lotus pod hand. And I thought that was going to be just a picture of a lotus pod in someone's hand to give that pod scale so that you could see how big it was, which is exactly what I wanted. So I allowed that search. It turns out I think I have trypophobia, because what it really was a series of pictures of hands upon which a dried lotus pod had been photoshopped to make it look like there were holes, a series of deep holes in these people's hands, like they had some terrible skin disease. And it was horrifying. And I like basically inverted to get away from the image. I was on my phone and I like let out this like howl of like, oh God, it was awful. Guys, don't Google it. If you have a sort of like gut reaction to imagery like that, I didn't even really know how much my gut reaction would be. Like, if you had asked me if it would bother me, I'd say probably it will bother me. I don't know. Not that bad, I assume. But like, I had quite a reaction to it. It was awful. It was real bad. So, I had to be a little bit more careful. Like, I tried a new search and was like fresh lotus pod and seeds, because apparently the ones that really can make you like creeped out if you have trypophobia tend to be the dried lotus pods, which are used in a lot of decoration and like dried flower arrangements and wreaths and things. But the fresh pods, they look almost like a shower head, weirdly. And the holes are about like the size of a dime. And the seeds inside are roughly the size of like a hazelnut. And there's about like 10 or 15 of those hazelnut-sized seeds inside. And they are like kind of this clear green, almost like a gooseberry. And I have never eaten one. Apparently, like, they are quite a thing. They're a very popular snack still. But I'm curious about them. I would love to try one. And even in this book, Farah has had lotus seeds covered in sugar or made lotus paste for desserts, but she's never had a fresh one. And with like trying these is all a kind of a new experience. And the goddess pokes out the seeds using a hairpin, and she says that they're like some of the bitterest cores. They're just horrible, so do not eat them. And they sit there eating and just having kind of a lovely afternoon. And it's sort of a sweet scene, you know? And she's talking about the stuffing of these seeds and the way that they're all done with like different stuffings, and people at parties, it's sort of a game to see what you get in the center of yours when you eat one. And she says, how we fill our hearts has much to do with our fates, far more than our native talents, the circumstances of our birth, the vicissitude of fortune, or even the intervention of the gods. If you do not like the stories you've been told, fill your heart with new stories. If you do not like the script you've been given, design for yourself new roles. And Thera says, I am named Dissolver of Sorrows. When the bitterness in my heart has been dissolved, what is left is potential. Is this the way that she thinks? This makes me feel like she's quoting something, but I can't remember what that could be. It just seems like a really specific thought. I don't know how she arrives at this, that she's the dissolver of sorrows. Is that her? Like, I don't know, but I feel like I missed something a little bit here. So at this point, she realizes that this woman is a goddess, and she gets the chance to ask a question. And she decides that she's going to ask this goddess the most important question that she can think of that nobody has been able to answer, which is, what can you tell me about the nature of smooth mirrors that can conjure ghosts? And the lady is like, well, I think I could probably kind of answer you. And she throws a lotus seed out and tells them to watch the ripples. The ripples expanded until they struck the straight edge of the wharf, which reflected them back toward the center of the lake in a new series of concentric waves. The waves from the carp and the reflection intermingled, forming an interlocking pattern. And Thera sort of misinterprets this lesson and thinks that it's about friendship, and says, like, our strengths may strengthen each other, but our faults added together may lead to a worse result. And the lady's like, well, that's not really what I meant, but that kind of also works. However, I need you to think about the waves and reflection, for light in its true nature shares much with these waves. So I think what she's saying is something about the reflection bouncing off of some different cuts in the base underneath the glass. Those reflections come together and form another image. And I think Thera will eventually come to that conclusion. She does not seem to get it right away. But I'm hopeful that Thera is able to sort of like figure this out and mitigate some of this damage. It would be kind of amazing if Thera started unknowingly working against her own mother. But then we come to chapter 25 called Tests and Countertests. And we have Gia talking to Othokrin. And he is saying the mirror makers have been silenced. And she says, and the workshop burnt so that no trace of their secret remains? A wave of nausea struck Othokrin. Even when he was a bandit, he had not liked the sight of blood. He had hoped Gia would comfort him, but that was not to be. It seemed to him that she was changing more and more from the woman he had known, but he pushed the thought aside. Lady Gia, the Empress, he silently corrected himself, had always known the right thing to do, and he was going to help her no matter how he felt about the details. Love demanded sacrifices. And the other thing? Gia asked. An anonymous note was passed to Duke Koda's spies. The ship from Arulugi will be searched on arrival at Tunoa. And she says, once Rin's men begin to focus on Teko Kimo, be sure to let Kimo know. I will do what I can to help things along. So I don't know, because as we wind up seeing, Theka winds up getting away. And I felt like the original advice that he was getting from his, quote, friend and advisor was all at Gia's behest. But now that he actually escapes, I'm unsure whether that was part of Gia's plan, whether she wanted Theka to get away, or whether she intended for Theka to be arrested and be like an example to everyone. Either an example of what will happen if you rebel, or an example of Kuni betraying his friends, which might be what she's after here. I don't know what it is she's trying to do. So yeah, she says that the people of Dara may not ever really appreciate what it is that Otho Kryn has done for them, but that she does. And that seems to be enough for him at the moment. But I wonder if Otho isn't eventually gonna crumple, because it's like he is really having to constantly remind himself at this point about how he feels about her. And that kind of that need to reassure himself is a reaction to your initial thought of, this isn't right. And eventually those initial thoughts are going to become powerful enough that the follow-up thought of, no, it's fine, isn't going to be able to stand up to them anymore. So I just don't know how sustainable this is going to be. And I don't really have a great sense of how competent Otho is either. I feel like he's pretty competent, or they wouldn't have gotten this far. But is there a chance that he will just fuck up and leave a trail? That there might be breadcrumbs showing here and there, is Gia intending to just straight up overthrow Kuni and take on the leadership herself? Is that possible? Because Kuni talks about how much she values stability, but evidently he underestimated her, or misunderstood. So then we hop to Kuni reading a letter about how Theka is under suspicion. And they're all giving him different advice on how to handle this. It's a real sad moment, because Kuni clearly does not want to believe this of his friend, but he also doesn't want to be a fucking chump. And there, Rasana says something about summoning Ginmizotti, and Gia says, if the charge turns out to be false, then you summoning Gin on this guy is going to look really bad and make other people who are loyal kind of worried about you. And Gia tells him to announce a tour of the islands, and basically give them the chance to try and scramble to cover their tracks and see how they react. So Kuni agrees to this, and then we cut to Theka and Kanotho. I do not remember Kanotho. I don't know if I'm supposed to know who this is, or know what their place is in all of this, but I don't remember them. But Kanotho seems to be an agent of Gia's, or at the very least is a pawn and doesn't quite even know what he himself is doing. But Theka is, at this point, still on the side of trusting Kuni. And it's very clear that Kano's whole job is to basically undermine that trust. It is Kano who constantly suggests what it is that Kuni is probably actually doing. It is Kano who is explaining to him that there's a precedent for the way that Kuni might be about to treat Theka based on the way that he broke faith with the hegemon. And it's just the whole thing is so upsetting to read because Kuni is experiencing the exact same thing on his end. They are both being manipulated into not trusting one another. And Gia is so subtle about the way that she does it. She doesn't ever make a suggestion about Theka's actual loyalties. She never takes a stand in either direction regarding where his loyalty lies. She simply advises Kuni on how to find out what his loyalty is. And all of her suggestions seem extremely reasonable. So it's, looking back, I don't know if Kuni will ever really see what it is that she has been doing. Kyle says he was Kikomi's bodyguard who, quote, rescued her and helped her to get to the Zindus. That's right. I forgot about this because he mentions her a couple of times and he is aware that like her history is not what everybody says. I really enjoyed him like standing up for her. Actually, that was pretty dope. I enjoy that Kikomi's whole story has been brought up again in general. Like I didn't expect that to actually amount to anything in history. I thought that it would just be, that the way that everyone wound up remembering it would be something that the reader had to accept. And it's kind of fun to see it being questioned and people pushing back against it after all. The Emperor is trusting and honorable, and since I've cut off the supplies for Nodami and Doru Solofi, he'll not act against me. So we get a little bit of a look inside what's going on with Theka in general as king of this area. He is not confident in his position. He recognizes that the other people, the older families, the richer families, they do not take him very seriously. Arulugi has they have all of the same snobberies about the origins of a person that many of these islands do. And they know about his humble beginnings, and he doesn't have the table manners. He doesn't have the grace. He doesn't have the competence for the small talk and politics of things, and sort of leans on Kano for practically everything. And that is exactly what Kano sort of exploits here. So that the question remains, even if Kano was Kikomi's bodyguard, I don't know if he's actually straight up working for Gia or if he is just giving the best advice he knows how, and it happens to be bad advice. But it is a shame to watch this whole thing happening. So there's this moment where a man comes out of the fog and he's rowing a boat. And he's singing this song about Tazu will protect me because he's about to go swimming to get oysters. And people keep warning him that there's a lot of sharks in the water. And he's convinced that Tazu will protect me. And it's the same joke as the man who refuses for a helicopter to come or refuses a boat when he is trapped on the roof of his house at a flood. And everybody who comes to try and help him, he says that God will save him and won't go with them. And eventually he dies and asks why God didn't save him. And God was like, I sent you a fucking boat and a helicopter. Like, what did you want from me? This dude is expecting a, heavenly hand to reach down and pluck him up and place him on the dry shore somewhere. He is not seeing the way the world is. And this is a very similar story where this guy is saying that, Lord Tazu will protect him and goes swimming in shark-infested waters, despite everybody telling him not to go. And he asks Tazu, why didn't you protect me? And Tazu's like, I sent you a bunch of warnings. I don't know what to tell you. So I think that this is interpreted by Theka as basically, you have to be careful about about fucking Kuni. You are seeing the signs. Pay attention to them. And I don't know why this is happening because it feels like this dude is a god that's here to fucking mess with shit. He wore a necklace of shark's teeth, rather incongruous on this tranquil freshwater lake. So that feels to me like we're pointing at a god who's out here meddling again. And I'm mad about it. These gods just need to fucking mind their business, man. They are out here just in shit. And just like, you know what? If you're not here to help, just get out. I hate you. So, yeah, let's see. How can the man whose very victories were founded on betrayal speak of honor? After the rebellion, Kunigaru honored all the great nobles who died during the rebellion against Zana. Jizu is venerated in Na-Theon, and Mokri is worshipped in Wolf's Paw. Even the hegemon himself has shrines erected in Tunoa with the emperor's approval. Yet Kikomi is an exception. We have never been allowed to erect a temple to her memory in Arulugi, and the craven scholars, careful to please the emperor, continue to smear her reputation in the history books. So, yeah, he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder, R.E. Kuni. Kyle says the necklace of shark's teeth is Tazu's tell. Ah, thank you. Yeah, I really should, get a list of these gods' names and their dealies, because I forget all the time. I can tell when it's happening. I just don't know who it is. So then Kimo says something about how Queen Gin will defend them, to which Kano's just like, well, where the fuck is she? And he finally is like, you know what? Why don't we just be cautious? And rather than just straight up meeting him, I'll meet him halfway. And this is just it's hard to watch again, because we jump back to Kuni's POV and he is like seeing what it is that Theka's doing and trying to figure out what the fuck the guy could possibly be thinking, because he's just like hurt by it. And eventually, they wind up meeting in the center of the river in what is supposed to be like an open, safe area. And it's clear that Kuni has sort of created there's going to be an illusion of some kind set up. They're going to sneak attack him somehow, which is exactly what happens. So they meet out there, and Theka begins this speech about wanting the independence of Arulugi, about how they were only given a few scraps. And Kuni is just like really irritated. I feel like if this hadn't started off this way, he would actually listen to these like requests with more of an open mind. But because it seems that this guy is already fomenting rebellion, these demands are coming across in a much uglier way. And Kuni says, "You have supplied the rebels in Tunoa and amassed your troops and ships against me. I summoned you to explain, and you refused to come. Feigning illness, you dictated terms to your lord, showing a heart intent on treason. I have been tolerant beyond reason because I do not wish more blood to spill, and yet you dare demand justice." And it's like sort of sad to watch, because Kimo is like, well, you know, if you already think I'm going to betray you, then it doesn't matter what I say now. But we will, like, I have given you my demands, and we can still be friends and partners and allies if we are independent. And Kuni is just kind of like, yeah, this dude is still acting like sort of a thug and trying to like kind of hold me hostage here. And obviously doesn't have the understanding to like even make his argument on the fly. He's obviously memorized the speech that he gave. Like, it's just a bit of a moment of contempt from Kuni, which is unpleasant to see, you know? And Kuni says, "Ram the ship," finally. And there is this like rush of water from underneath. And what we see is that there is one of those like submarine dealies underneath that has been like waiting for the signal. And this thing rams the ship and destroys it. Like, it really immediately splinters this into a bunch of pieces. And the sailors are falling into the water, and it seems for a moment that for sure Theka is also in the water. But then Kuni looks up, and Theka is flying through the air on a pair of wings. And it turns out that the big robe that he was wearing over him that looked like so thick, it actually was hiding an apparatus. And he was sort of sitting on a kind of catapult that he could trigger at any moment that would send him like shooting into the sky. And then he just has to spread out these flexible like wings made out of bamboo, and he can fly to safety on the shore. And it's not something that's like super reliable. This isn't something that you could just deploy over and over again, but it can pretty reliably work at least the one time. And it's just kind of a badass moment, honestly, because like Kuni really thinks that he has it figured out here and just underestimates his friend completely. And it says, Kuni watched Kimo glide out of reach, and he sighed, knowing that the peace that had ruled the islands of Dara for 10 years had come to an end. So yeah, I feel really bad here. Like, Gia is instigating genuine rebellion here. This isn't like a little shakeup to try and see who's loyal and who's not. She's making sure that shit really begins to pop off. And as much as I try and like understand what she's agitating for, I can't put my finger on it, because the only thing that I can really see here is wanting Kuni to be deposed in favor of someone else. And I don't see who she wants to be deposed. Like, she has to know that Timu is not going to be a good guide in the face of this kind of, like, right? I feel like that she knows Timu well enough to realize that inheriting a torn up country isn't going to work. If Kuni gets deposed, it's not like one of his heirs is going to take over anyway. Does she want somebody completely outside of the family to be the one to take over? Like, I really don't know what it is that she's trying to do here. Because initially I thought she just wanted to agitate things a little bit in order to distract, maybe. And things have gone far enough now that I no longer feel like that's adequate an explanation. So yeah, I don't know what it is that she's doing. But I feel really bad for Kuni and for Theka, because they just both got sort of used or tricked. Like, I don't even think Kano's trying to trick him. I think Kano's like trying to operate within what would be I think what it is that Kuni is treating Theka as if Theka's making his own decisions and sort of trying to behave in a way that he thinks Theka will be receptive to. And he's not thinking about the fact that Theka has advisors who will interpret what Kuni is doing in a very different way and give him advice that is the direct opposite of what Kuni expects Theka to choose to do. So, yeah, I don't know. I just feel really bad about it. And I hate seeing Kuni, after everything he's gone through, watch people continue to not trust him or betray him. It's sad. I don't like it. So yeah, that's about it. I think I'm going to wrap this episode up. I feel like there was another thing I wanted to mention. I can't remember. I want to know what's going on with Zomi most. I would like to go back into her POV and see what it is that she's thinking. And I really want Thera to sort of like snap out of it and get over it and find her like the way to make the most of what she has been given, because all she does is lament over what she can't do. And she has so much power if she wanted to access it, but she doesn't admit that. She wants the kind of like freedom that it's understandable why she would want that, but she has the potential to do a lot of good. And I want her to have a little bit more respect for that potential. But yeah, she's a kid. What are you going to do? So, all right. Thank you guys again very much for listening. And thank you to Kyle again for commissioning this episode. Thank you for helping me out in the chat here and reminding me of stuff as well. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. So till then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.